The mud of the Narragansett Trail was a slurry of gray slush and ash. John Teft stumbled, his breath coming in ragged, white plumes that vanished into the freezing air. He was a man of 60, but in this moment, under the weight of the news he had gathered at the roadside, he felt like a century of stone. He had walked from the ferries, bypassing the safer coastal routes, driven by a singular, desperate hope. But the travelers he passed, militiamen with hollow eyes and refugees with nothing left, spoke of a horror that defied the Bible verses Mary had taught their children. The Valley of Ash. John reached the edge of the great swamp. He didn't see the sprawling, vibrant village he remembered from the days he had visited Joshua and Sarah. He saw a blackened ribcage of timber. The great fort had been turned into a funeral pyre. Hundreds, a passing scout had told him, not even looking up from his horse. Men, women, the little ones in the wigwams. We fired and killed the lot of them. John leaned against a charred hemlock, his chest heaving. The labor of 60 years in the family farm, the decades of tilling Portsmouth soil, none of it had prepared him for the smell of a world ending. He wasn't just weak from the journey. He was weak from the realization that the loving strength he had given Joshua had led his son to stand in the center of this nightmare. The news of the capture. He pushed on toward Wickford, his legs shaking with every step. Near the outskirts of Smith's Castle, he huddled by a small campfire with a group of nervous Rhode Island settlers. They didn't recognize him as the father of the renegade. "They got him," one man whispered, poking the fire with a stick. "The Teft boy. They say he was with the Indian king's son, Canonchet himself. They made it out of the burning fort, lived like wolves in the woods for days, but the Massachusetts boys tracked him down near Providence." John's heart gave a painful thud. He's alive. For a fleeting second, the exhaustion lifted. If Joshua was a prisoner at the castle, John could talk to the officers. He was a freeman. He knew the Winslows and the Dudleys. He could plead for a father's mercy. "Don't bother looking for him," the man continued, casting a pitying look at the old, bedraggled traveler. "They brought him into the castle 2 days ago. The trial was shorter than a grace at dinner. They're calling him the greatest traitor in the colonies. Said he directed the fire that killed the English captains. The final mile." John stood up, his joints screaming. He didn't thank the men. He began the final mile toward the stone walls of Smith's Castle. The sun was dipping low, casting long, bloody shadows across the snow. By the time the silhouette of the garrison rose out of the mist, John was crawling more than walking. He saw the torches on the ramparts. He saw the masked soldiers, their armor glinting in the firelight. And there, in the center of the yard, he saw the heavy timber frame they had erected. He was too late. The eternal protection Joshua had promised Peter had come at the highest price English law could demand. John fell to his knees in the frozen dirt of Kingston, the loving strength finally snapping. He didn't cry out. He simply lowered his head, a father who had traveled across a world of fire only to find the embers of his own heart. He stayed there in the dirt, old and broken, as the winter wind carried the news he would eventually have to carry back to Mary and the boy left behind. The wind at Smith's Castle didn't just bite. It screamed. John Teft stood before the heavy timber gates, his hands shaking so violently he had to tuck them into his sleeves. He looked like a ghost of the man who had once been a proud freeman of Portsmouth. His eyes were sunken, and the loving strength he had once possessed was now a thin, brittle thread holding his soul to his ribs. The verdict of the stones. "I am his father," John rasped at the sentry, a young man in a stained buff coat who looked more bored than cruel. "I have come for the body of Joshua Teft. I have come to take him home." The soldier spat into the frozen mud. "There is no home for a traitor, old man. Your son didn't just fight. He led the heathens against his own blood." The court was clear. He was hung and quartered 2 days ago. What's left of him is for the crows and the wolves to settle. It's the law of the king. John collapsed against a hitching post, the world spinning in shades of gray and ash. To be denied a burial was to be erased from the earth. The thought of Joshua, the boy who had protected this land for his son, being left as carrion was a horror John couldn't carry. A whisper in the dark. As John sat broken in the shadow of the garrison, a hand touched his shoulder. It was a local man, a settler who had known John years ago. He leaned in close, his voice a ghost of a whisper. "Listen to me, John. The Indian king's son, Canonchit, he didn't leave him. He and a few of his braves slipped over the walls in the dead of night. They took what the English left behind. They loved him, John. They took him to bury him in the deep dark where no white man will ever find the grave." John looked up, a spark of desperate hope igniting in his tired eyes. If he could find Canonchit, he could find his son. He could say a prayer over the earth. He could bring back a handful of soil to Mary so she would have something to weep over. The road to the end. John didn't wait for morning. He turned back toward the Kingston woods, his legs moving on instinct alone. He was a man chasing a shadow, walking into the heart of a war zone with nothing but a father's grief as armor. He reached a bend in the road where the hemlocks grew thick and the light of the moon couldn't penetrate. Suddenly, the shadows moved. 3 warriors from King Philip's tribe stepped into the path. They were paint-streaked and weary, their eyes hard with the losses of the great swamp. They saw an Englishman. They saw the clothes of the people who had burned their mothers and children in the wigwams. They didn't see a grieving father. They saw a scout heading toward their king with murder in his heart. The final silence. John opened his mouth to speak, to say the name Joshua, to ask for Canonchit, but the words never came. A heavy war club caught him across the temple, sending him into the slush. As he lay there, the old and weak body finally giving up, he didn't feel the cold. He saw the hearth in Portsmouth. He saw Mary opening her journal. He saw Peter playing with a wooden hawk. With a swift, brutal stroke, the cycle of violence that had claimed the son now took the father. They left him there on the side of the Kingston Road, his head taken as a trophy, his body an unmarked mound in the snow. John Tefft had gone to find his son's remains, and in the end, he became part of the same soil. 2 generations of men lost to a war that spared no one, leaving only the letter in a journal and a young boy named Peter to carry the name into a silent, haunted future.